Hey everybody, welcome back to Tanner's Favorite Things. I'm Tanner Knight, and today I'd like to do a little history of the Zildjian ping ride. This is a topic that very recently became important to me because I picked up this cymbal to my right. This is a local score that I just happened to grab, and it is a Zildjian ping ride. And it's from somewhere after 1982, between 82 and 1994, based on some factors that we'll talk about here in a second. However, the real reason that I wanted to do this video is because this is my normal everyday ride. It's a Zildjian custom A ping ride. Both of these are the 20-inch variety, so they're same there. But this one's from 2002, so a much newer cymbal, still over 20 years old, yes, but it's not quite 40 years old. So that's the difference. We have a 20-ish year old cymbal and a 40-ish year old cymbal. So once it came to do a little research on the Zildjian ping ride, I went to YouTube and found a bunch of different ping rides, just sound samples. 1 minute, 30 seconds, someone doom, 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 and giving you a good range of sound across the whole spectrum of Zildjian cymbals throughout the eras. And that's cool. That makes my job a little easier. I don't have to go out and buy $50,000 worth of cymbals to demonstrate the sound of each here. But I did find it hard to have one video that talked about the progression of the ping ride throughout the decades from its inception. So I'd like to hit on that briefly, and then we'll get into some sound samples of these two cymbals and talk about what makes them unique. So I'd also like to briefly touch on how I got information about either one of these cymbals so that I could tell the rough date, and then from there discern some other information, fill in the blanks on the internet. And if you're looking for a great resource to look up information about cymbals of all varieties, there's a website called cymbals.wiki.com, and they have everything from everybody, and that's a really great resource if you're looking for one specific cymbal or a series of cymbals. You can go there and check that out. That's where I went to do a lot of research here, so a lot of the information that I will be relaying to you comes from that website. Just know that the ping ride is kind of where the big ride all started. So let's talk a little bit of history before we get into sound samples of either of these two cymbals. I'd also like to get some specs on them to see how they differ from decade to decade, but really the heart of the ping ride is birthed in the 1950s. And the 1950s is the beginning of rock and roll, but these cymbals were more the domain of the jazz drummer. Those were the cats of the day who were really the pinnacle of the field of drumming, and they were dictating the styles. So big band and jazz was the most popular style of music that these cymbals were aimed for. So what players of the time wanted was a really dry cymbal that was loud, that could cut above an entire big band, or brass section, I guess would be the most offensive part of that equation. So the ping ride was developed, and what they did is they raised the bow, so we have a much higher bow instead of a much lower or drooping bow. And what that does is it creates more tension on the top side because that gets hammered more than the bottom side. So that's kind of the physics that go into creating this cymbal. But what's the outcome? Well, it's a very dry cymbal. It's a little higher pitched than a typical medium weight ride cymbal of the day. And it's just loud. It's really freaking loud. So you can hear it across the room very, very easily. So in the 50s, they developed the ping ride, and there's not too much information about that era of Zildjian ride cymbals or ping rides specifically, because as you can see, they are ink stamped, and that was the case back then. And once the ink's gone, you can't tell anything other than what the weight is if you take the weight. You won't get much information from the bell size because in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, even into the 80s, I believe, they don't mess with the bell at all. The bell is set to the diameter of the cymbal, and that's what you get. Another hallmark of the ping ride is that they are heavier. They're just more weight. And in most cases, even in the 50s, you'll find them above 2,000 grams. And once you get into the 60s, those grams tend to bump up into the 2,500 territory, even pushing 3,000 grams for a 20-inch ride. And speaking of sizes, they did make an 18-inch, which I have yet to see in the wild. I think that would be a cool sounding ride. If you have an old 18-inch ride or even a new one, I'd love to check that out. But we have 18, this is the 20-inch, and then 22 and the big boy 24. And I would love to be able to have all of those cymbals in an array for you, but I don't have $50,000 to spend on ride cymbals just yet. So maybe in the future that will happen. But the good news is that every one of those cymbals and sizes and years has been documented on YouTube in a short 1-minute video. If you just type in the name, the year, and the model of the cymbal, chances are someone has given you a sound sample. So go ahead and use that at your discretion. And a slight side note, this doesn't pertain to just the Ping Ride, but the Zildjian cymbals at large do have a stamp that can give you a lot of information about the era in which it was birthed. And the stamp is right here on this one. You can't see it on camera, obviously, but I'll put a picture up here of it close up. And that gives you some information, like for instance, we have the 3 dots in the logo here, and we have a bold Zildjian logo. The word Zildjian is in bold face. So that's a kind of quick way to get some information about these cymbals. And if you're just kind of at a lack of where to go, always try to read what's on the cymbal first. And it can be faint, but it's good information. So as the Ping Ride develops through the 60s, jazz starts to get supplanted by rock as the primary genre of music, and we have rock drummers who are kind of calling the shots in the mid to late 60s, well into the 70s, 80s, 90s, and kind of up until today, really. But we have rock drummers who want what? More sound, they want more volume. So in the 70s, these heavy chunky boys get even heavier, and we start to, again, push that 3,000 gram threshold, I guess, for a single ride cymbal. And if you're a big rock player who has 2 of these on either side or 1 on either side of the kit, that's just, 6,000 grams right there of weight that you have to carry in and out every single gig. And the corresponding gear was also just as beefy. The crashes and all of the hi-hat, the cymbals were thicker, beefier, so that they could be louder and project more. And this is kind of the era of live music where everything gets bigger and broader and louder. Whoops, just realized that my light was off here, so I turned it on. So the 70s, everything's getting louder and music is expanding into arenas. So of course everything's mic'd, but it's still a live context. So bigger is better until the 80s when things just go off the rails. That's when you have power toms in the tom sizes for drums, and cymbals at that point kind of stop getting bigger because they've already gotten to a big point, and they kind of taper back in the early 80s into the mid 80s, and of course into the 90s when we have a lot of the more famous style of cymbals that a lot of our heroes today that we know played back in the 90s and before. So by the mid 80s, you have something that's a little bit lighter, and again, we'll get the specs on this one specifically, but I'd wager it's closer to that 2,500 gram weight just by a quick, picking it up and shaking it and whatever. But this is an 80s cymbal, and you can tell by 1982 our ink stamp is showing the size of the cymbal, which in this case is 20 inches or 51 centimeters, and that also gets carried on throughout into the 1994 and plus era where we have this laser etching system. So with the older cymbal, this is the last style before they move into that laser etched logo and stamp rather. And so this is a real stamp on this one, and it's kind of the end of an era, really. That stamp has been there since the 1800s or even before. I think Zildjian goes back to the 1600s even. It's a very old company, if nothing else. And the stamp has really been their stamp, and obviously that changed up in 1994. But once we get to the 80s, we get back to the block style of logo like we had in the 60s. It ends up actually looking a lot like a cymbal from the 60s, and it would be easy to get tripped up and assume that this one is from the 60s because our logo does have the 3 dots. It has Zildjian in bold, but it does say Zildjian Co. period, C-O period, which I believe it was just Zildjian back in the day. But either way, it's very, very similar to the 60s logo and the 60s inking. And you could even find 60s cymbals that say Ping Ride that were inked like that, but they would not have the size below that. So this is a 1980s, probably 82, 3, 4, 5 maybe, cymbal from Zildjian, and yeah, it's badass. So this one, on the other hand, when we go to 1994, that's when we actually get a new laser etching system. They don't stamp anymore. I guess it was the move towards progress. But in this case, our stamp, or our laser stamp, we'll call it, has a 2-digit code after the Made in USA. That 2-digit code corresponds to a year of manufacturer. In this case, it's JB, which stands for 2002. So that's how I came to the conclusion that this is specifically a 2002 cymbal, and this is kind of early 80s based on everything that I can tell here. I've had a late 70s set of Zildjian cymbals with the hollow logo, and they feel and look very similar, minus the differences in logo and ink, but that's what makes me think that this is an earlier 80s one where they just started over with the size stamp here. So we'll call it an 82 to 85, and again, 2002 over here. All right, so before we hear these things, let's get a few specs and understand the spatial differences between these two cymbals. And again, this is not a comprehensive, this is all Zildjian ping rides from this era, this is all Zildjian ping rides from that era. This is just two cymbals head to head that I happen to have here that we can take a look at. Okay, let's get our bell width, and this is kind of difficult to do with these calipers, but you just kind of have to find where the bow starts to bend up into the bell, and that looks like about 5.09 inches. 5.1 inches, we'll call it 5.1. And the bell here is actually identical. So I'm not sure what makes it look different. This one to me looks a little bigger, and maybe it's taller. It's kind of a hard thing to get there, but it's a little, it just looks bigger to me. If you can see it, or if it looks that way to you, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I just took measurements and they are identical. Let's get a thickness gauge here, 0.07 inches. Let's get millimeters actually. We have 18 millimeters thick, and on this guy, 18 millimeters thick. So exactly the same thickness. Different machining techniques, obviously, between the 80s and the 2000s. And the visual differences are, you can definitely see more hammer strikes on this one than you can from the 2000s one. It's actually very smooth and lathed. It looks like most of the hammer strikes have been lathed out, whereas that's not the case on this one. They're certainly more prevalent in the 80s. All right, let's see what these things weigh. I'll be using a standard kitchen scale for this weight today, and I couldn't find a clever way to video it, so you'll just have to take my word for it. I'll be as honest as I can. Okay, our custom A ping ride comes in at 2858 grams, 2,858 grams, while our 1980s ping ride comes in at 2698 grams, 2,698 grams. So this one's a little bit lighter by 100 grams or so, and that's something that is interesting. I didn't expect that to be the case. I figured it'd still be tapering down from the 70s, but it looks like they tapered down pretty early on to a kind of reasonable weight for this ping ride. Now, they do make medium and heavy and presumably light. I doubt they make light. I don't know. If you've ever seen a light, let me know. But it sounds like medium and heavy are pretty much the only distinctions that you'll find out in the wild. And if I had to guess, this one's probably a medium and the heavy would be heavier. So that's my best guess, but I can't be 100% sure because there's no other indicator to that effect. So let's go ahead and hear both of these cymbals on their own, and then we'll put them with a kit and hear them in the context of a full set. Okay, recording the sound today, I have two SM57s trained on, I don't know, the upper 3 or 4 inches of either of these cymbals. And they're about an inch away from the actual cymbal, so it should be a really close representation of what these things sound like. So I'm just gonna go ahead and smack on them a few different times. We'll hit the bow, we'll hit the bell, we'll hit the edge, and then I'll put them in place on the kit and get some sound samples with a full kit. Let's start with our oldest first. Okay, I guess I can talk over it now. Just dry as hell. So dry. Sustained for millennia. The thing is still going, and it will still be going after that. Let's hear the bell next. The edge is a little muted. I thought it would be a bit more rowdy and have more bite, but the edge is quite pleasant and can be used in all kinds of different contexts. It's still going. Yep, it's still going. So I think that the hallmark of this cymbal is sustain for days, dryness, attack, and just sustain. That's its bag. It's not too overly attacky, it's not too in your face, it's pretty mellow with the attack, but you can definitely hear it in all aspects of the cymbal. Okay, here we go on the newer 2002 Custom A Ping Ride. Let's start with the bow. You can definitely see the vibrations happening towards the edge of the cymbal more on this one. I'm surprised that it's not thinner, but they measured 18 millimeters equally. So that's a great sounding cymbal to me. I just love the sound of the cymbal. And the longer you hit it, the more sound gets created and it gets a little washy. I'm never gonna call a Ping Ride washy just because that's kind of the opposite of what it's trying to do, take away the wash. But this one has a little bit of nice wash in it if you really get on it. I think I like the bell on this one better. They're both pretty good. All right, let's hear the edge of this one. Also, very mellow. That edge is very pleasant. It doesn't jump out and crash at you. It's just round and mellow, and it builds over time. Those are two good sounding cymbals. Okay, that's enough of these solo. Let's hear them in the context of the kit. Again, starting with the 1980s Zildjian Ping Ride. Okay, here we are behind my Yamaha YD7000 kit from 1982. pretty similar in age to this guy, they might pair pretty well. In addition to that, I do have a 1978 or 9 Zildjian hollow logo crash here. This is an 18-inch, and it's also a chunky crash. It's quite possibly the heaviest crash I've ever picked up. But it does crash, and they should pair well together. I've typically have another crash right here, but I just took it out for ease of camera setup. So just a quick rundown, YD 7000 drums. I have a DW Design Series black chrome snare, the hollow logo crash, the pocket ride, the 13-inch Zildjian custom-made pocket ride hi-hats, and my Iron Cobra double kick pedal, which I recently fixed. You can check that video out if you haven't seen it already, linked below. And an array of 5 microphones capturing the sound. I typically will like to have some overheads, but for this setup, we're just going to go close mic and rock it that way. So here we go, the full set with the 1980s Zildjian Ping Ride in the 20-inch variety. Keeps going. All right, let's swap that out for the more modern custom-made Ping Ride and see what that one sounds like with the kit. All right, here we are with my favorite ride, the custom-made Ping Ride. Let's hear what this sounds like in the same drum set. So as always, I would love to hear what you think. If you think that one sounds better than the other, let me know and let me know why. I personally prefer this cymbal just because it's been my ride for probably 3 years now, and I've fallen in love with it, and I just cannot find anything to replace it in my heart just yet. So We'll keep this one with the Superstars, and we'll probably keep the 80s with this kit. I think it matches pretty well. So let me know what you think about this type of content. If you do like it, I would appreciate a like and subscribe. That always helps. And either way, I will see you on the next one.